Hello, everyone, and welcome to ESM's High Five AP webinar for success. Um, we'll get started soon, but in the meantime, we'll wait a couple minutes just to let people join. So,
We'll give people like 2 minutes before we dive in.
yep, one more minute or so for everyone to join, and then we'll get started. Okay, I think we're ready to go. Taryn, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, so just as Brian said, welcome to ESM's webinar, High Five Prepping for Success on the AP Tests. My name is Taryn, and I have my wonderful colleagues Brian and Renee here. And we've joined together here to talk about preparing your students to achieve their fullest potential on the AP exams happening this May. So we're going to be talking about the different types of the AP exams that students are generally taking and how to maximize their time leading into those tests. So to start off, why take these AP exams? Some students ask this, some parents are not sure why students are taking their AP exams. Um, and before diving into the different types, the main benefit to taking these exams is your exposure to the rigor of college curriculum, which can be a big step up from what students are seeing in their normal high school classes. So starting this transition into this higher rigor can be helpful to build that overall student success in their college career. And so just being able to see what they're getting themselves into and be able to build up those study skills and test preparation skills that they're going to need to be successful is really important. The next potential benefit is in college admissions. A student's AP scores can impact their college admissions process, though it does vary with the schools that they're applying to. Most schools don't place a huge value on AP scores, unless you're applying to schools in the UK. UK schools do place a pretty high value on those AP tests, and so it's important to be aiming to get those higher scores if you're going to take the test. Finally, and most importantly, a high AP score, usually a 4 or a 5, can earn you college credit, um, generally towards those general education courses that you're taking earlier on in your college career. For me personally, I took a ton of AP classes in high school, and I was able to start off my college career, I think, as a sophomore in credits. So I was able to register a little bit earlier than my peers, and I was able to get out of some of those general education courses that a lot of my roommates and friends at the time were complaining about. They are important to do because they do expose you to a wide variety of subjects, but the complaints I got were some of them were tedious and they were not often subjects that they were wanting to pursue longer term. That was the ones that they were complaining about. And so, one thing that is different this year, and I'll let Brian take that before he dives into those AP Humanities exams.
So the one thing that's different is that the AP tests are somewhat moving towards a more digital format. Significant portions of the test are going with what they call fully digital this year, meaning students will take them fully on the Blue Book application. That includes both the multiple choice and free response portions of the test. But there's technically three possible formats now: fully digital, hybrid digital, which is a mix of digital and paper, and then there are still some that are paper. Right? So it's kind of like a weird kind of mix of collection depending on the nature of the test, right? If it's just multiple choice, that's probably just digital. If it's just multiple choice and an essay, that's still probably fully digital. But if there are other components like a speaking portion or a written portion that requires calculations for math or that kind of thing, those will likely be hybrid digital. The important thing, this is a bit confusing, but the important thing to remember is that whatever test you're taking, the actual test itself is not changing. It's just moving to a digital format. So you'll just be taking it on the computer. Nothing else is fundamentally changing about the nature of the test, meaning there's no change in the way you prepare for them. Obviously, you want to be aware that it's a digital test and what to expect, but it doesn't mean you change your preparation in any second. So we'll mention this as we kind of go through each of the tests, but keep in mind that doesn't really affect any of these preparation tips. Like all this stuff is going to be exactly the same, whether it's digital or paper version, pretty much. So getting into that, kind of the first kind of big chunk of APs are the AP Humanities exams. So first, what these basically include are arts, English, history, social science, world language, cultures. Basically anything that is really not STEM or more of the kind of not one of the more random arts stuff, right? So your foundational humanities curriculum, that kind of stuff. So there are some differences for preparing for these tests in the various areas, but they tend to emphasize a kind of core set of skills. And I'll talk about some of the differences, but let's go over the kind of the core skills first. First, as a whole, they generally tend to emphasize passage-based reading comprehension, right? The key here is it's not even though full passage anymore, it's really more paragraph-based comprehension. It's generally more you read a paragraph and you analyze that and then you answer questions based off of that, right? So it's not like you need to be reading like full essays or anything. It's more just short text that you have to analyze, right? So when you're preparing for the test, you need to prepare like that kind of reading, be prepared to evaluate a document in front of you in terms of whatever class it is. For history ones, for example, when you have a passage-based one, it won't be just about reading and comprehending the text. You'll need to connect it to whatever the main themes of the period that the question is addressing. So it will require a mix of outside knowledge, outside content knowledge, as well as reading comprehension, right? Um, then, of course, there's vocabulary building. When we say vocabulary here, we don't necessarily mean vocabulary in the broad general sense, although that does help, of course. It's more like specific terminology for the various classes. For AP literature, for example, you'll need to be comfortable like analyzing the various literary devices of poems or essays or that kind of stuff. For history, of course, you'll need to know important terms and ideas and peoples of certain periods, right? So it's just being familiar with that. That said, most of these tests are not memorization tests. You're not studying vocabulary lists and just memorizing. These are not how these tests work. They're more like taking these concepts and applying them to big themes, right? And that's, if I have to emphasize one thing for preparing for these tests, that is learning each of the big themes of each of the main periods of each of the classes more than anything else. It's not about memorizing a billion details or anything, right? Um, so in terms of preparing for them, that should be your focus. You learn the big ideas first, and then you kind of zoom in and get all the granular stuff as much as possible. Right? So that's kind of like the big idea here with these. Okay. Anything to add?
I don't think so.
Okay, then I think we're ready to move on.
Okay. There are a good number of AP STEM exams, and those include your math, statistics, computer science, some that are not listed on here, physics, chemistry, environmental science. Um, and these tests are really focused on having that conceptual understanding, having the vocab that you need on the of the content itself, and then being able to take that and apply it in a broader context. So a lot of these tests are, can you identify the aspects of the question that are things that you learned about, and can you take them and apply them using the knowledge that you gained throughout the course? Um, as far as preparing for these tests, I recommend that students start reviewing the material now, like very early on in this semester, specifically the first semester material. A lot of the STEM exams build concepts upon each other. And so as students start reviewing that older material, they'll come to find that it is coming back up in the material that they're learning this semester. The other aspect of that review is that some courses are structured a little bit differently depending on the teacher how the teacher likes to present the information. Some courses build in a longer review period, and so they rush through the material earlier on in order to be more intentional with their review. They normally start reviewing like a month to 6 weeks leading into that test. Other teachers choose to be more intentional with the content throughout and building that understanding, and so they might not wrap up their coverage of the base content until a week or two before the test itself. And so one thing that's important for students to understand is what their teacher's timeline is on how to get ready for this test. And if their teacher is planning to keep going through content until a few weeks before the test, they really need to be spending a lot of time outside of class going over that earlier content and making sure they're building in that review to be successful leading into these tests. Most of the STEM exams are going to be the hybrid format, and so they're going to have generally the multiple choice portion will be electronic or digital, and then the free response question portion will be written because there are interpreting graphs, data, things like that that are going to be happening on that free response. As far as preparing for these exams, I recommend that students not only review the material, but that they try to get or take advantage of any resources that are available to them. And so oftentimes teachers have access to providing them resources through an AP Classroom account where they're able to do a good number of multiple choice questions, some free response practice. Outside of that multiple choice and what they're getting in class, it's hard to find other multiple choice resources, but there are some third-party resources that I would recommend to students working with me. For free response questions on these tests, there are years and years worth of free response questions available online. Students do have to be careful because the format of the test has changed over the years. And so if they start using significantly older free response questions, they might run into different formats from what they're going to see on their test. Beyond just that content review and taking advantage of resources, I recommend that students also work on the strategy of the test itself. So a lot of the STEM-based exams will have bolded action verbs that kind of dictate how a student should be answering the question. And that can be very helpful in both knowing to what scope they need to be putting content on that page and also be efficient with their time, as time is a component on these tests as well. So overall, the STEM exams, I think, are something that can be mastered, but it is not something that students can cram for in the end and be super successful.
And just to add on, if you have any questions about specific resources or any general questions about anything we're presenting, feel free to post them in the chat and we'll answer them as we come up, or at the very end, we'll have a section for answering questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else to add, Renee or Brian, on the STEM exams specifically? Okay, we can dive into the next set.
Awesome. Thank you, Taryn. So, besides the main AP classes that many schools offer, there are still many subjects that are not taught in all schools. So, for example, the AP Capstone program, which includes AP Research and Seminar, and these classes specifically will familiarize students with skills such as research methodology, presentation, project-based learning, all of the important skills that students will utilize in college. But besides this specific course, I recommend that as early as you can, you start to take a look at the list of AP exams that are offered by the College Board to see, what your school offers and what your school doesn't offer as a course. And if there are any that speak to you, specifically ones that really align with your, career or major interests, you can absolutely self-study and do some research, register at a school that is offering that test and take it yourself. And from like a college admission standpoint, that's going to reflect well on you because it shows initiative. And also, if you get a good score, as we said before, not only can you get, college credit for it, but again, it shows that you you overcame potentially an obstacle and you were able to do it yourself. So the little caveat with that is just to make sure that if there are tests that conflict with your schedule, which they do because the College Board will have like tests at the same time, make sure you register for alternate testing that will be on another date. And then if you have any accommodations to make, you make sure you register with them ahead of time for, time accommodations. And also, on another end, make sure to check which ones have switched formats. As mentioned before, there's fully digital, hybrid digital, and paper. So, AP Chinese, AP Art and Design, those formats haven't changed, but, look out because they might in the future. All right, so For the next slide, I'm going to summarize some study skills that have already been mentioned by Brian and Taryn. So first, you want to familiarize yourself with the format and expectations of the exam. Every exam, maybe there's a multiple choice section or an FRQ section, or a different exam might have a short answer section, but not a long answer section. So make sure you understand, the grading rubric inside and out, especially if there is a writing portion. And as I said, know which tests are going to be fully digital, hybrid digital, or paper, because even though the content hasn't changed from last year, it is going to change how you take the test. And as we all know, one of the study skills is try to simulate the situation as much as possible. Being in the same, room and the same desk practicing is always better than being in a completely new environment and taking a test. So knowing which, format you're going to be is going to help you when you're studying as well. And then, of course, as was mentioned before, you want to start making a plan and updating it as needed. So right now it is mid-January, and that means that you have a few months to study, and it's a great time to start. Don't, when you're studying, feel like you have to reread your textbooks from start to finish. That is not the most efficient use of your time. Definitely buy prep books. Your teacher might have recommendations for which ones are the best. Your tutors might have recommendations. Some are a little bit harder. Some are going to be better for, the quantitative sections of the test. So, it might not hurt to get, a couple books, but get prep books. Then also, use Khan Academy, especially for digital tests, because you're going to, have practice with a digital format. Use the AP resources that your teachers and your school provide if you have. And any past tests that are online, you can use it to get an understanding of the content. And yeah, understanding of the content and maybe what the test takers, the test makers, what they might value or what they might focus on, and getting used to the wording of the questions as well. So there's also YouTube videos that you can watch that might summarize and cram topics and big concepts in a palatable way. And take official practice tests when you can. Of course, some of them are not really like there's not that many online, but if you can find, take them. Just remember that the formats have changed. So if you're taking an old test, just know, okay, maybe this is not the way it's going to be it's not going to be asked this way on the actual test. So another important thing to know about studying is generally what you're going to cover in your classes is not exhaustive of what you're going to see on the test. So that means, there's going to be content that maybe you just kind of just learned a few weeks before the test, or maybe there's content that was skipped over and your teachers told you to study on your own. So to fill in those gaps, starting now is a good idea. As Taryn said, start reviewing first semester content already. It just passed by, but you don't want to cram 2 semesters worth of content in a couple months. And take practice tests as frequently as you can, through your prep books, through whatever resources you do have access to, especially once you start, gearing towards May, once, twice a week. And make sure to really understand why you get problems wrong. I like to recommend to my students what I like to call a mistakes journal, which is really taking every single question and writing it down, why you got it wrong, what you misunderstood, and like how you're going to avoid this problem in the future, and having a log of it in a nice notebook. And then before taking every practice test, reviewing it again to know like what are the patterns of, how I'm reading the question wrong, or how I'm making an inference that shouldn't have been made. All of that is going to help when you are taking these standardized tests, which are really testing you on how to take a test and in connection with the content. So for essays, make sure if you need to get that graded, um, ask somebody else. Don't grade your own essays. Maybe ask a teacher, ask a tutor. That's worth doing. And if you need accommodations, make sure to sign up for it ahead of time, separately. Okay. So I think I covered and summarized most of the study skills. Does anybody want to add some tips that I missed?
No, I think you got it, but just to like, summarize everything like in a couple points, right? The main thing I think would say is review semester one material, right? Like that's number one. That's the stuff you learned initially and may have forgotten or didn't learn correctly once you're new. Second thing is study diversely, right? Do not just stick to the textbook and review. Have a diverse material of study materials, either YouTube, review books, AP Classroom, Khan Academy. The more diversity, that will help you learn deeper, right? And then quality and quantity in terms of prep, but quality over quantity, right? Don't just churn through a billion multiple choice questions, right? That will help, but it's not going to be super efficient, right? Always be conscious and intentful with your preparation.
And I think just to add, this all comes down to kind of the overall theme of today is that your students do need a plan. Approaching this without a plan is not going to be anywhere near as effective as utilizing these resources if you're not doing it in an intentional way. Okay.
Okay, so that's pretty much it. So the last part will answer like any questions you have, and we did just get one, and it is a pretty interesting and relevant one. So our question is that I read that using AI is great for having it generate sample questions and explaining concepts. And the question asks, do you agree or disagree? And I think my answer is yes and no. Be careful. Like, yes, it's a very powerful resource. It absolutely can be used very well, but these large language models are still very new and they are not perfect, right? And in fact, if you go to any like model, they will explicitly say that they will get things wrong, right? And so yes, but it's tricky. You have to play around with it. You have to know the AI very well. You have to know how it makes mistakes. Basically, you have to train it to help you, if that makes sense, right? So it can be helpful though, and especially if you're just completely out of multiple choice questions and you have no other source for practice, it can do that. But just be careful. Like with that is all I would generally say. I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say though.
I 100% agree. I've actually done some testing with these models and have found that they are very much not correct a
Yeah.
chunk of the time. Um, and so what I recommend is they can be useful for a quick summary or to, as Brian mentioned, training them to help you, but I would not use them in place of some vetted resources.
I would say
Um,
probably the best use is to test your understanding of concepts. So like, hey, here's this AP Psych concept or whatever, and just keep asking the AI questions about it rather than having it generate accurate questions. Like that's a little iffy still, right?
I think the most useful is if you can help develop your comprehension or your scientific inquiry for the STEM test specifically, it's going to be a good resource.
Yeah, but it's interesting. I'm very interested to see where this goes. It's still pretty new, but I imagine our advice will be very different on this next year. Yeah.
Looks like we have a follow-up. Is Conmigo better?
I mean, that's just Khan Academy's AI. So like it's the same. I don't know. I haven't used it like too much, but it's just like the same as the other ones. It obviously is more directly connected to AP stuff. So like yeah, if you have to start with one AI, it's probably best to start with that, right? But I haven't used it enough personally to say whether it's like super effective or not.
I'm in a similar boat of I've noticed some common themes of things that the AI might struggle with, but I haven't tested Conmingo specifically extensively.
Certainly intrigued as you can tell to see where it goes. Okay. Any other additional questions about, AI or anything else in general? We'll wait a couple more minutes. If not, that'll pretty much we'll wrap it up, and you guys will all get emailed a full like recording of the webinar for future reference.
Yeah, and if you do think of questions following the webinar, you're always welcome to reach out, and we're happy to support in any way with ESM as a whole.
Okay, I think that looks like it's pretty much it. Thank you for joining our webinar. Any final thoughts, Taryn or Renee?
Just thank you for everyone that
No?
joined, and I hope that yeah, you're able to take some helpful tips and things back to your students today, and how they can be successful leading into these AP exams.
Yeah, thank you so much. And if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to email.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone.
All right.